Hello everyone and welcome. In this video, I am going to explain to you the basic anatomy of a contract and tell you the differences between writing normal code and writing GenLayer Smart Contract code in Python. So let's get into it. Now, we created a file called first.py because all GenLayer Smart Contracts are written in Python. Now, for the first thing, we define the version comment. This is the first line of code you define in any Python, in any GenLayer Smart Contracts code that is written in Python. So this is just basically a dictionary with a key value pair, a key of depends with a value of the version, which is currently py GenLayer test. Now, if you notice, as I was writing this code, the terminal is actively updating. So this terminal update can act as a debug. So firstly, if you notice RPC, I just enable the RPC logs and the consensus logs. So disable these two because they are very unnecessary and they spam your terminal. So you can see only the GenLayer logs are available. Now it's currently telling me that I have no contract class defined. Now we are going to define a contract class. But first, before that, we import the GenLayer standard library by saying from GenLayer imports asterisk. So this imports all the necessary types into the global scope of our code under the GL namespace. So we can do gl.contract. You notice it's still throwing the error because we haven't defined the contract class yet. Next, I am going to show you some brief differences. Just three main differences for now, and eventually we'll get to the rest. Firstly, if you're writing GenLayer Smart Contracts code, you're not supposed to use the default Python list. You're supposed to use the dynamic array. This is what GenLayer understands as a list. Next, we have the dictionary type, which provides key value pairs. So GenLayer doesn't understand this. What GenLayer understands is the tree map, which very similar, just different naming schemes. And finally, we have the integer type. So GenLayer doesn't necessarily understand the integers. What you use instead is the I32. Either use the unsigned integers, which is annotated by you, followed by the integer size, which can range from 8 till I think 128 or 256. It goes up. Or you can use the I32. The normal integer, which is which is again I think from 8 to 256, an arbitrarily large number. So yeah. Now, as we've imported the GenLayer under the namespace of Geo, we are going to define our contract class. Now, just for you to be aware, once we define this class, any and all smart contract code must be run inside this class. Anything outside of the class is not going to run. So we define our contract first and then inherit from the GL contract class. So this is it. Now we've defined the contract. You notice that the error has been updated. It is now showing the initialization method is unavailable. That's the next thing we are going to define. But firstly, as this is our first contract, you want to define a greater contract. So we'll pass in the name first with the the name will be a type of string. Then we define the inits, the initialization dunder method. Then we pass in the instance of self and we pass in the name. Now, this initialization dunder method is the first method that is run when this contract is deployed. So I can show you an example. If you go to the run and debug console, you will notice the name string. So this function is called upon deploying the contract. So any initial state variables you want to declare, this is where you declare them. Now, this function, when it is deployed, it updates this name string here. Next, I'm going to create a function that allows you to modify the name, since this is a greater function. Now, to define a function, you first of all need to write a decorator. All smart contract methods are decorated by either the view or the write decorator. Now, the view decorator tells the smart contract that said function cannot modify state. So, does not modify state. So, we have to define the view function. We say gl.public.view. And we've defined the view function. So we're going to define a function to greet. Let's call this greet. Then we pass in an instance of the self, and the function returns a string. Then we say return f string hello self.name. Now we have defined the greeting function. So this does not modify state, it just only reads the state. Now we are going to define a function to update your name. Now that function most definitely modifies the blockchain state. So to do that, we call the decorator first again by saying gl.public.write. So this tells the blockchain that this function modifies the smart contract state. Let's call this set name just to make it shorter. Passing the instance of the contract, and then we passing the name that we want as a parameter. Now this doesn't return anything. So we just say now when you're writing your GenLayer smart contracts, you can debug with the print statement. So I'll just debug print the old name. Before I update the new name by saying self.name is equal to. Now this says the old name and this pulls the new name. So this will assign the new name and replace the old name. So yeah, our contract is complete. Now the next phase we are going to do is to compile and deploy this contract and test. Luckily for us, the GenLayer online IDE allows us to compile and test. So we are about to deploy our first contract. So what we do is we pass in the contract is already compiled, and we pass in, this is the constructor input that is required from this dev init. Now if we are to pass in another input, let us say age. Let's just say age. Now to require that we pass in our age. So I'm going to remove this for now. In later videos, we'll see how much more we can go with this constructor. So for now, we pass in our name, let's say Tim, and we deploy the contract. Now this opens up MetaMask because I am connected to MetaMask. But for this tutorial, I'm going to switch to the native account provided by the IDE. And we are going to deploy the contract, which is almost near instant. Now the contract has started deploying and it has proposed the contract and it's almost done committing. So contract has been deployed. Now we can call the greet method. When we call this contract, it replies, it gives us the response, hello team. Then let us change our name to, let's say, Drake, and send the transaction. If you notice the logs, you will see when the execution of the transaction has been, when the, let's call them transactions have been executed, you will notice it printed out. This was the debug print, old name Tim, which was what we set here, and has updated the new name to Drake. So you are going to call the contract again, and you will notice the name is Hello Drake. So thank you, and see you in the next video.